euros as before. I govern a budget of 100 billion. So you see that the context is different, and that within that context, looking for excellence within that context is quite an enterprise. Because it's quite different in these two contexts. And this is the same now for this presentation. I heard yesterday evening that I had to come to a new context, which is giving a presentation on excellence in teaching and learning. What does it mean? And I will try to do my best. I will strive for excellence just because we are in a striving model here. And go through what is in your brochure. You know that this is an explanation of what it is, what different aspects are, what the procedure is, what we are trying to do, what we try to react to. But of course, I will put my own, how should I say, my own experience in that. First of all, it is the most exciting and visible part of the studies, teaching and learning. I hope so it is for many students. I hope so it is also for many teaching staff. That it is, of course, visible when we go to institutions, we see what's happening there. And what always strikes me is that when I go to one institution and I go to another institution in many countries, most of the time I've seen all the buildings because they all look alike. My question is what is the relation between building and excellence, and what is the relation between building and education, and how you look at education. There are auditoria, there are seminar rooms, some of them are multifunctional, there are computer rooms, but I don't see many institutions in which buildings are in a very apparent way linked to their vision on education. So it is the most visible part of the studies, most visible thing of the work we do in our institutions. It's quite instructive. You walk around in an institution, you can smell the atmosphere, you can see how it works, how it's organized, is it bureaucratic, if it's multifunctional, how they think about people and space. I don't mean the network. These are the different subdomains of teaching and learning. This is, first of all, there's a strategy. Then there are the approaches to curriculum development, the content for learning and teaching, and then the learning environment, and what do we do with our HR policy, with our teaching teams, the program teams, but also the teaching teams. And these are, how should I say, these are the backbone of the framework we developed within PHExcel. If we talk about excellence, we can talk about these landmarks within the things you do and how you look at them. Especially in relation to the world of work, because this is the perspective we take. And how do these, I go back to it, how do these subdomains interact in our relation with the world of work? And first of all, and I think this is a quite essential part of the thing. This is quite essential part of the thing. Because when it comes to working with the world of work, you can see that sometimes it is not, there's no holistic approach. You need a holistic approach. It's more than internships. It is how is the world of work interacting with your own governance at all levels? How is it involved in program development, in curriculum development? How is it involved in teaching activities? How is your teaching staff involved in the world of work? How is assessment done? Who is responsible for the assessment? Who gives the final mark? And in different contexts, there can be different approaches to that. Because at the end, when you talk about the interaction on learning and teaching in relation to the world of work, it is of course about who is the owner of the organization of the learning process. Who is the owner? And what parts are owned by this institution? We work together with a German university where students were selected by companies, not by themselves. You see that this is quite different context. in which the ownership of learning and teaching is quite different when there are some clear rules on how to have access to the university, to the institution. You see that within the access process on itself, we must define our landmarks. We must define how to deal with it in cooperation with the world of work. And now we want to reach excellence. So it's not, how should I say, it's not a neutral exercise. It is really starting out of an approach. It is starting about what your university can be. Because if you consider employability as one of the main issues, one of the main characteristics within your universities that go through all the programs of your university, these competences become the values of your university. Common core competences are values within your institution. And you see that the structural integration into learning design and in implementation of the world of work is one of the utmost important issues you have to address on how to work with this context in which you are operating. And it is not only the world of work, is not only big companies, it is also SMEs. It can also be schools of secondary education. It can also be hospitals. The regional aspect is very important in that, because you will need to have a complementary politics in that, in sectors and in regions. What is the history of your region? What is the challenges of your regions? Is there a policy at regional level? How to deal with it? You see that the structural integration of the world of work in what you do sounds easier than you could think, because it's really multifaceted. You have to think about, in fact, the sense. Why do you exist and what will be the outcome? When I considered, and we've been talking about this the last few, not only days, but also weeks, and it was also at the agenda of the BFUG, what we see is that employability is very high at the agenda. And when you consider what happens within our society with diversity, with radicalism, and things like that, the question is, do we have to adapt to that context? You see that other aspects are something interfering when we talk about the world of work. It's about the whole role of what your institution could do within the employment sector, within your sector, but only the role you have in educating people for the upcoming society. So this is, how should I say, this is a comprehensive approach we are just pleading for. The strategy, and then I think this is for me one of the most important things. This is how learning and assessment, but especially assessment, is attuned to the professional environment. And this is one of the most difficult things for us to do. All of us, we come out of an input-based tradition in our education. We were teaching disciplines, coming out teaching the structure of disciplines. This was input-based. This does not mean that disciplines are not important, but this means that there is a challenge when you want to make the shift to output-based learning, which is working on learning outcomes. And learning outcomes is on how to teach your graduates, or how your graduates can deal with complex problems or with complex challenges at their working place. This is something very different from input-based education. This is being in contact with them. This is not living with the uncertainty of development. I heard that the OECD tried to make, to look in the stars and see what in 2050 there will be. I think we don't know what professions will be within 5 years. The only thing we can do is how to make these new professions, how to deal with evolutions, how to deal with innovations, how to deal with challenges within that profession. And then I always said to the people in my institution, if you do some curriculum development, start with assessment. Start with assessment. Because most of the time, the students do not learn for your subject. They learn for their exam. And when students learn for their exam, you must assess what they have to do afterwards. They must be able to do that. And their learning will be oriented to these things, because exams are a question of survival for students. So this is quite important on when you want to attune learning and assessment to the professional environment. I will go a little bit faster, Marek. So I said it is about learning outcomes, it is about assessment, it is about methodology, and how can we bring them in line with the personal needs, but also of the context. Teaching and learning strategy. Here's another image from Danuta. I'm very grateful that she can make wonderful PowerPoints, in which learners, practitioners, and teachers contribute, let us call it added value, to the development, which is an active thing, the development of professional practice. It is not only adapting, it is people empower them for finding new things, for new solutions on what the trends are, what the future can be for them. It is the integration, alignment, and it is, of course, it is a mutual influence. It is a circular process in which the world of work, considered as companies, but also as the region, but also not only big companies, but also SMEs and all these actors within that, as a circular process, just to see how we will deal with things. And it will be structural. This means that they are involved in development, that they are involved in maintenance and in review of the process, but the owners in education are the educational institutions. This is quite important. And it is also how staff, the world of work, and students will be involved in curriculum development. This is a question of equal partners. You know that nowadays sometimes you have to deal with students who know more than you. The knowledge of garden. In former times, there was a fence, and the professor was at the entrance of the garden. And he took the students into the garden, looking at the roses and to float flowers. But now, the only difference with what is happening with this garden is that there is no more fence. And that knowledge comes into that garden from everywhere, from the internet, from Facebook. There's a new layer of our society in developing things and knowledge and how to deal with problems and values. So this is how people can be involved within curriculum development. Curriculum development, I go through the presentations, but also research. Research is a continuum. It is a circle. It is closing the things. It is finding new things, finding new solutions. It can be market-driven, but it can also be driven by fundamental research. But it will be quite different. And every player is there in a different context. And I think that institutions of professional education and universities of applied science don't have to play the role of traditional academics. They have their own role to play. They have their own niche, they have their own approach, they have their own models and methodologies, and there's enough place under the sun for them just to find new things out. So it is to inform and enhance each other into curriculum development. It is a question of collaboration, cooperation, networking. It is a question of research. It's a question of mutual enhancement. It is not a one-way direction. It is adapting, but it's also trendsetting. It is also innovation. And it is, of course, not only a question of local things, though they are very important for our institutions, but it is also being part of an international community. We act local and think global. And then this is also talking together, cooperating research, enhancement on the future needs of society. The content for learning and teaching, it's not only a pie, making things, how should I say, more sexy than they were before. This is not doing games with students because they like games. This is not going for boot camp because students like to go to boot camp. It must be relevant to what we're doing. It is not only about flavor and attractiveness of the activities. We're talking about transferable competencies. This means transferable competencies. This means that this is one of the most sustainable research teaching outcome of higher education. If we talk about sustainability, this is sustainability. Talking about changing needs is also how to deal with these changing things. On how, with our transferable competencies, we can detect needs, we can find solutions, we can react to crises. And we know that we never should spoil a good crisis. Yeah? We never should do that, because it's a moment of creativity, because it's openness, it is going to society. Content, we're not talking about the pie, but it should be applauded by all the participants. You know that the most efficient organizations and organizations that have a speed of decision is an organization with a common vision. If there is not a common vision, you talk about the price of a bottle of Coke. You're not talking about real challenges that are there. That's quite different. We're talking different languages with each other. We don't have the same values. We don't have the same objectives. We don't have the same curiosity. A common vision. There's nothing so practical as a theoretical common vision. It is recognized by all the actors, not only by the world of work, but also by teaching staff, by students, by regional actors, by stakeholders linked to professions. It is a blend of theory, practice, and teaching research. I'm just repeating myself with reference to the world of work and to academia, to the student with the learning outcomes, and it is really challenging for him. This looks like a bull. The learning looks like a bull. When I'm a learning psychologist, and I always learned that you cannot force anyone to learn. It's impossible. I'm decided starting from 7 o'clock, you will start learning. This is impossible. You will start learning when there is a question of survival within it. That there is something that you can use for your own life, something that is an answer to your questions. This is what you see when you work with adults in lifelong learning. They're really critical about what you teach them. They don't want to come and hear what everybody knows. They want an answer to their own questions because they want the answer to survive in their own working context, because things are changing. So, challenging experience. A learning experience must be challenging. And in that way, learning is life. Learning is a way of life. Learning is breathing for everybody. Another, theory practice, transferable competences, responding to each other. It is recognized and it is challenging. These are the different aspects that are in the indicators and within the guidelines we developed. And then the learning environment, very interesting thing. The learning environment. I was talking about buildings within institutions. But they must be in harmony with the program. When I was at kindergarten, I attended a nun school in kindergarten. And we learned swimming on our belly on a chair. You could try to do that. Yeah? This means that your learning environment must be relevant for your outcomes. It must be authentical. There must be real challenges, real things that are happening there. There's about accountability of the results, about what you're doing. There's about is there a relation with the work I'm going to do afterwards? Is there a relation between the region I'm going to live in, the labor market I'm going to live in? So I stopped learning to swim on a share. You can go, things are coming into the learning environment and things are going out of the learning environment. So it enables learners to move in and out a professional setting. In and out a professional setting. You know that before we went for a job for 40 years, now we change all the time. We become hoppers. We become hoppers. We go from one job to another. We change because we think we deserve it. I think sometimes because the organization deserves it. But we must be able to go from one working environment into another. This is the benefit of the employee, but also of the organization. It has new ideas and that people can have new challenges, because the development is necessary, because then creativity and transfer of competences can be sustainable. It is stimulating. It stimulates learning in and for practice. Learning and for practice. You know that people who work in institutions or programs that are very much in line with professional practice, and I'm thinking about nursing, but also I'm thinking about teaching and things like that. Your students come in and they want to practice. They come in and they want to practice immediately. So the question is, how do we deal with practice? What is the relation with students learning coming out of an input-based education, because most of the time secondary education is still input-based. And the gap between secondary education and higher education is growing, in my opinion, because the difference is much different. It is growth between the two. So it stimulates learning in and for practice. So this is an whole track. How will you introduce practice-based learning? How will you introduce work-based learning? What is your vision on work-based learning? How do you deal with it? What are we learning? What are we learning? If you send your students to a company, if you send students to an hospital, how do you audit companies? How do you audit hospitals? What are your expectations to these? How are they involved in practice? Do they know what work-based learning is? So I think that the track for learning in practice is a very interesting track, which we have to think about. And then, of course, it creates the conditions to achieve the learning outcomes. This is the same. I want to refer to my example on swimming. It is in harmony. We could say it is authentical, it is valid for the working environment. It is very close to the development of working environment. The things we have to deal with are relevant with the things we have to deal with in our working environment. There's a mobility from one working context into another, because we change from working place more than before. There is, of course, it must be challenging, which is quite important, because the world of young people is sometimes quite different than the world of an institution. And the world of working people attending lifelong learning is sometimes quite different from an institution. So it must be stimulating. There will be the practical context and, of course, the conditions for learning. The program teams, and this is one of, I think this is one of the most important things, is your own HR policy within your institution. We are a little bit afraid of HR policy. We consider teachers as sometimes like SMEs, with working on their own discipline because they like it, because their heart is there. If you teach languages and your heart is with Goethe, you'd like to teach Goethe to your students. But you know that HR policy is quite relevant within this framework. It is about having quite different roles within a teaching team. Before we had to teach. There was a teacher in front of the classroom, just as I am now, and he acted as, I call it, an oracle. Trying to convince students, trying to be interesting, trying to keep their attention. But now we have teaching, we have quality assurance, we have international relationships, we have inclusive higher education, we have learning outcomes, we have the development of sectorial skills and what is happening within our sector. So you see that there are different people, different roles, and different capacities and different competences needed within a teaching team. And then it is, of course, a blend of academic and professional expertise. Within professional education, this is a real important issue when it comes about teaching staff that is a representative of a certain discipline. If you have a language teacher or a geographer working in tourism, they have to know what it's about, what is the practical and professional practice within their sector. So this is a real issue. It is about, of course, a combination of trends, of international research and working together. It engages and it is informed by education and professional expertise. It is recognized and there's an engagement toward the world of work you're dealing with. You're not working in a vacuum. You're working in a sector and you're working within a certain field that you want to shape and that you want to serve. I'm almost finished, Mark. And this is it. Okay, thanks a lot.